Welcome to another edition of Ad Talks. This is the fourth in the series. So far we have had about 3 of them, which was more on creative. But this time we thought we'll have somebody from the planning side of the business. And that's why we have Anirban Roy, who's the head of strategy of Wade and Kennedy. Thank you, Anirban, for being here and for accepting our invitation. Normally, if you see our creative briefs, tone and voice, apart from the mandatory, what is a single-minded proposition, or who is the target audience, etc., the tone and voice is tucked away at the last, or probably a little before the last. But in this era of digital communications, I think it's very important that brands get their tone and voice right, so that the whole narrative becomes very critical, and the whole narrative is built around that tone and voice. And Anirban will throw some light on it, and hopefully we take some learnings out of this session. So thanks so much, sit back and enjoy. But before that, I would call upon Bala, the secretary, to hand over a welcome menu to our guest. Yeah, that's a coffee table book of that. Yes, thank you, and I hand over the floor to Anirban.
Thanks, Anshul. Good evening, everyone. If I stand behind the lectern, you won't be able to see me. I have my shortcomings. I hope I'm audible and I'm not blocking the screen. Thank you so much for having me here. I guess that's the first slide. Thank you, Ad Club. Thanks to my ex-colleague and now friend Anbu for giving me this opportunity to come and spend this evening with you. Thanks to all of you who's decided to show up on a Friday evening. Clearly, I'm keeping you away from family, friends, beers, everything else. Hopefully, the next 1 hour should be worth your time. Let's start with the subject itself, which is brand voice. Right? The reason we picked brand voice as a subject is partly 2 reasons. One is Biden and Kennedy as an agency is very good at giving brands voices. Nike being the classic example. It's a brand that Biden has built from day one. And secondly, given the age and time that we're living in, unfortunately, I'm sorry to break it to you, my presentation doesn't have any reference to ChatGPT, AI, generative AI, performance marketing, programmatic, omni-channel marketing, and all those very important pieces. But we're going to talk about brand voice, that's for sure. And this is the first up disclaimer. Most of this deck was made from other people's observations. Most of the ideas are stolen. So I'm just sharing some of the learnings that I have learned from my colleagues over the years across agencies and also at Wade. What we'll do today, I thought instead of just generally giving gyan, it's always very useful if we look at cases, right? How did something come to being, right? So we'll look at 3 very different cases. One is from the US, which is McDonald's, a brand that all of us are very, very familiar with. The second one is obviously from India, Indigo, a brand that Biden has created again from scratch. Again, all of you are very familiar with Indigo Airlines. Hopefully, most of you have flown that airline at some point of time. And the third is a brand from the UK, which is a brand of butter called Lurpak. Right? Again, many of you will be familiar with these brands. Just a little bit of context setting before we get into these brands. You can, of course, interrupt me at any point of time. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll kind of keep 15-20 minutes at the end, or even longer if you want me to hang around and just generally answer some questions, clarify some things. I'm more than happy to do so. So just setting some basic context. This, again, most of you, I was going through the attendees kind of list and realized that there's a wide representation of audience in this room with a very degree of experience. But hopefully most of you will agree that this is largely the building blocks of a brand. There are the functional attributes that help drive the rational side of things. So the entire conversation that we keep hearing from brands of cheaper, better, faster, whiter, etc., that appeals to our rational side. It helps us to rationalize the choices that we make as consumers, not necessarily as advertising people. And then there are values and associations, which great brands often do very well, which is what builds the emotional side of things, which speaks to the heart, right? And of course, both the rational and the emotional kind of play together to kind of drive brand and brand value and brand equity and all of that. Just to give you a very quick example, again, something which hopefully all of you will agree with. On the rational side, when you walk into a Starbucks, I mean, why do you really go into a Starbucks? Because it's a great place to hang out, it's got good coffee, it's got free Wi-Fi, it's got comfortable chairs. That's the rationalizing side of things. On the emotional part of it, it's actually a chill space for successful people, for aspirational people. And it's an American brand. We enjoy kind of being part of that space that has been created. And traditionally speaking, Starbucks was founded and positioned around this whole idea of third space. The first space being, home. The second space being work, where where all of us spend a lot of time. And the third space being Starbucks, where we go to kind of chill, have a conversation, etc., etc. So here's our approach to building brands, which is why the conversation around helping brands find their voice. We believe the blocks that I just kind of shared with you, it's not enough to just have those building blocks, i.e. the rationalization blocks or just the emotional side of blocks. We need to create a world around a brand. Whenever we look at a brand, and many of you are in creative, many of you represent advertising agencies, PR agencies, etc., etc. We need to build a world around it. Think of all the brands that you, as a consumer, as a human being, really love. You will realize that there is something about the world that they've created that appeals to you. Right? It's a very primal appeal. So the question that we oftentimes ask ourselves, both in planning as well as in creative, is that when we are building a brand, apart from all the promises that we make and all the benefits that we put out there, etc., etc., how does it all really feel? Right? Because feeling is very important to brand building. Right? Does the brand evoke the feeling of being competitive inside of us? Does it help you kind of feel irreverent? Which, for example, back in the golden days of Pepsi advertising, Pepsi was built on the value of irreverence. If you remember the advertising that was done, 90s, even early 2000, it was built on the concept of irreverence. Does it make you feel optimistic? Classic example being Coke. Coke's point of view is that the glass is always half full. Right? The tension that it operates on is that there's enough shitty news in the world, and Coke, because it's an effervescent drink, it's full of bubbles, right? Quenches your thirst and makes you look at the glass is always half full. So how do brands make you feel is a question that we oftentimes ask ourselves. And that's really what we call as the brand voice. Right? Much more than just tonality. Yes, tone of voice is a part of it, but how does it make you feel? What is the world that we build around it? What is the mood that we build around it? And simply put, brand voice, without going into any rocket science or brain surgery, simply put, it's what you believe in, i.e. what does the brand believe in, what is the point of view of the brand in this world, what is the value system of this brand in this world, plus how you look, how you speak, and how you behave. That's really what distinguishes brand. And whilst we're going to spend a lot of time later on about Indigo, but quickly, if you just close your eyes and think about Indigo, the way it kind of talks to you, even through a headrest which says, I am 16 going on 70, or the nutcase that it has designed, right? It has a certain vocabulary, it has a certain grammar, and it talks to you in that particular vocabulary, diction, grammar, and it appeals to us in a fun way, right? But more of that later. But fundamentally speaking, just so that all of us are on the same page, brand voice is about what you believe in, what the brand believes in. So we have to spend an inordinate amount of time identifying what is our brand belief, what is our brand, point of view. Not necessarily purpose, because I think purpose, the winds of purpose are also kind of now falling behind. But I think what a brand believes in will always be relevant, and how we look, behave and speak will always be relevant. Just to give you an example of Old Spice, which is another brand that we work on and that we've created. And just a visual collage of the mood of the brand, right? The world around the brand that we've built. This is what we mean when we say brand voice, right? It evokes a certain feeling inside of you when you look and step into this world. And there's a famous Dan Biden quote where he said, Nike didn't discover the power of advertising. Nike discovered the power of its voice. The biggest advantage you have in this business is your voice, your own way of looking at things, and that is where your power lies. And I think the great part about this quote is it works for brands as well as people who work in advertising. Eventually, it's about us finding our voice, right? And I see a lot of young people in this room as well. As you kind of grow up the ladder and assume greater roles, you will realize what the industry really values is the voice that you bring to the table. It's the voice that you bring to your clients. It's the voice that you bring to your creative strategy or account management partners. And like I was saying, it's more important than ever, this entire business of brand voice. Why? Because people skip ads. That's the reality, right? We no longer exist in an era where the entire family is huddling around the television and everybody is watching one single show like we used to back in the days of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata back in the, 80s perhaps. So that bonfire doesn't take place inside the family. Even if people are watching inside the family, they are probably on their respective screens. Somebody's on a phone, somebody's on a laptop, somebody's on a television screen, somebody's on another phone, tablet. So people skip ads, people pay to avoid ads. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have subscriptions. They are paying money so that they can avoid ads, right? Whether it's YouTube, whether it's Spotify, all sorts of platforms, right? Ghana, etc., etc. So people are more empowered. Let's face it, that's the reality. It's bad news for advertising, but that's the reality. People are more empowered than ever to run away from ads. Media is obviously fragmented. All of you know this. And most ads these days are served on phone, which is also individual consumption. Right? You're watching it on your palm. It's individual consumption. Again, you're not. The viewership is not shared. Advertising, like I said, used to be a communal experience that punctuated and paid for the entertainment that we were consuming. All the ads that came in between, in the good old days, actually paid for the content that was being produced on the TV. That's how producers made money. Right? It doesn't work like that anymore. The world is changing. The world has changed forever. Not everyone starts with the brand, but we do. Not everyone protects the truth, but we do. And not everyone cares about how you say it as much as what you say, but we do. So marketers or agencies, and hopefully I'll get a few head nods here, typically choose one of these three starting points to create a brand. And there's a lot of brand creators in the room, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Either people start with the consumer, and I'll give you the example of Axe as a starting point. Or we tend to start with the category. Dove is a great example. Or we start with the brand. Old Spice being an example, right? Three typical usual suspects for a starting point when it comes to creating a brand, creating a campaign, defining a positioning, restaging a brand, etc., etc. So what's different about these three approaches? If you look at, for example, the example of Axe, right? They start from the consumer. You look for an insight about your audience that you can solve with your brand, right? So in the case of Axe, the insight was that young guys are obsessed with getting the girl. That was the insight. Sexist as it was, given the body of work that they produced, but that was the insight. Young guys are obsessed about getting girls. And the Axe solution was, Axe gives you the advantage in the mating game. When you're in the mating game, fragrance counts, smell counts. It gives you a great advantage. It's a valid place to start for a brand. But the insight is going to be true for other brands too. Right? I could literally replace any advertising of Axe with any other deodorant brand and it still works because it's about smelling good and it's because it's about being in the meeting game. Of course, they've built a distinctive world over a period of time, but that's what happens when you start with the consumer. What happens when you start with the category? Remember, we said you can start with the consumer or the category or the brand. So the second example, what happens when you start with the category? You look for a new point of view in the category, right? So that your brand can champion that point of view. Classic case in point, Dove. Right? Dove started with the observation that the category was focused on unrealistic standards of beauty. Right? It basically challenged stereotypical perceptions of beauty that we've been conditioned to, which is why Dove positioned itself as a brand that was a source of confidence. It believed that beauty should be a source of confidence, not anxiety. That's how Dove built its entire advertising, and the solution was for Dove to be the champion of real beauty. Again, it's a valid place to start, not saying it's invalid. But the category observation is again going to be true for other brands too. Right? Anybody else could have come up with that observation, could have championed and could have chosen to build the brand on that platform. If you start with the brand, however, you look for an insight that only the brand can shine a new light on, right? And therefore, the ethos of the brand, the values of the brand, what it has said so far, etc., matters a lot. In the case of Old Spice, before it got repositioned with "Does your man smell like my man?" Right? If you remember that entire campaign, it was the insight that this brand was literally seen as old fuddy-duddy used by my dad. It was an old brand, and we said that the new light was actually reframing the idea of old. Instead of saying, this person is a really old person, we said, what if we say we are an experienced brand? Because if there is one thing that all young guys and girls value, it is being experienced. Right? Hence, we saw the kind of stuff that we saw on Old Spice. So, focusing on the brand voice gives us certain distinct advantages. It fits with it fits with how our brains actually make decisions. Most of our decision making is system one. We don't pull up Excel sheets to buy brands. When you're in the grocery store or you're shopping or you're in the aisle, you're not doing rational 5-degree conversation to kind of pick the brand that you want to pick. You're standing in front of an aisle, you need a soap, you need a toothpaste, you need edible oil, whatever it is that you've gone to shop for. You have literally 2.5 seconds to make a decision. That's how you make decisions. When you come at it from the point of view of mood, feeling, brand world, it appeals to the system one part of your brain. This whole concept of brand voice also creates works that no one can steal, like I just demonstrated with Axe and Dove. Both clearly valid points, but Old Spice feels a little bit more like Old Spice. It helps you solve problems in innovative ways. We'll see more examples of that later. It helps the brand stand the test of time, and it helps creatives, most importantly, because nobody gets to see strategists' PowerPoint. They get to see the work that goes out in the marketplace. It helps the creatives to get to better work. So, with that, we'll start with the first case study, which is McDonald's. Just a quick sense of challenge, because this is a case study that I've kind of mounted from the US market. For 65 years, McDonald's was America's favorite brand when it came to QSR, quick service restaurant category. But they were facing heat, and there were a lot of new players, and the qualities that made the brand special had turned bland. Right? So it was being largely irrelevant to a large, representation of population, including blacks, Hispanics, Asian communities, and McDonald's was clearly seeing a decline in sales as well as penetration. That's the business context. So they came to us, and we figured that McDonald's spent too long listening to haters. Right? They were when their sales was declining, when their penetration was declining, like it happens with all marketeers and all agency people, we tend to focus a lot on the people who've gone away from brand and try and realize what's wrong with us, what did we do wrong, and that is why people have gone back. We said that's a problem because McDonald's has been defined by the haters. The brand had lost its soul, its confidence, its voice, so they asked us to help it again, help them find that voice back. So really, if I had to summarize the brief in one word, it was swagger. Get the swagger back for McDonald's, right? That was really the brief. So we decided to worry, less about the skeptics and instead focus on the fans. That's what we said we'll do. Not just super fans, but the fan in everyone. So we built a strategy around what people already love about the brand, and we went out in the market, offline world, not just online survey or dipsticks. We went out, we spent time one-on-one with fans of the brand, i.e. fans of the brand McDonald's. As marketeers, we learned something that as customers we already knew. That there are two sides to McDonald's. One is the big faceless corporation, which is McDonald's, which largely has a homogeneous design that belongs to the man. And then there is your McDonald's, the brand that you grew up with, the brand that you have memories of, where you know your order, where you have your rituals, where you feel at home. The two sides to the corporation, McDonald's. And this was the pivotal point that helped us get to the truth at the heart of this brand, or rather many truths. So we began collecting these truths and actually published a book called the McDonald's Fan Truths. I'll share some examples of these fan truths. So when America says I'm loving it, this is what they mean. One fan truth that emerged from the conversation that we had with audiences and consumers: your friend will take a fry after they said they don't want it. And you will realize some of these truths, as you see, it's not really quintessentially American. It could be even true of Indians and the way we look at McDonald's and the way we kind of interact and have our favorite orders, rituals, memories of McDonald's. Another fan truth was pickle lovers and pickle haters can still be friends. The golden lights of midnight celebration. When you've had a really late night, whether you were out partying or binging or studying or whatever, McDonald's is always open and you can always go there for a quick fix. McDonald's is the space where which offers the moment where grandparents become superheroes, right? Because it offers a bonding time, catching up and connect time. Is there anyone out there who doesn't eat the bits of cheese stuck on the wrapper? That's another fan truth. Another fan truth: the first restaurant you can afford to take your parents to. These are irrefutable truths about McDonald's, right? And these truths really help people see the brand they grew up with, where they know their order, have their rituals, feel at home. Truths about products, experience, moments, memories, rituals, behaviors. And they help us show McDonald's through a fan's eyes, through the eyes of someone who loves McDonald's. Now the moment you kind of look at it from the eyes of the fan, it already starts to kind of define and shape the kind of voice that the brand should take. Therefore, literally strategy on a napkin, written on a napkin. It's time to talk fan to fan about the many small truths that give this huge brand a unique place in American life. That was literally the strategy on a napkin. And fan truths really became the heart of our creative strategy, and speaking fan to fan was the key to our voice. So we took a simple fan truth to make our first Super Bowl ad, which was: no matter how big or famous you are, everyone has a McDonald's order. Right? Just think about it yourself, think about it from your family's point of view, friends' point of view. You will realize if they go to McDonald's, typically people have their favorite McDonald's order. In our country, perhaps it can be to do with aloo tikki, or it can be to do with veg burgers. It could be the Maharaja Mac, whatever it is. But everybody has their favorite McDonald's order. So I'm just going to play a quick video for you to understand what we did. I hope it plays. decide that everyone has their everyone has their simple kind of favorite McDonald's order. Then we kind of scale it up by saying there are even celebrities who have their favorite McDonald's order, hence the platform Famous Orders. Then we decided to scale it up further. Some of you may be familiar with Travis Scott, who's an American rapper, very popular in the US. We tied up with Travis to launch his favorite McDonald's meal, the Travis Scott meal.
What's up, world? Yeah, you. I'm Travis Scott. This is my McDonald's order. Follow me. Here's my quarter pounder. Lettuce, pickles, onions, ketchup, mustard, and bacon. Here's my fries. Sometimes I do this. Then I dip them in the barbecue sauce. Oh yeah, and my Sprite. Same order since back in Houston. And you can try it too. Gotta go. Travis Scott meal, just $6. Say Cactus Jackson cheap.
And obviously we didn't stop at just making a 30-second because we live in a digital world. So we obviously created content around different social platforms using Travis Scott. We tied up with Cactus, kind of develop certain illustrative style of comms. Then we designed some merchandise around the Travis Scott meal, which people wanted to pay and buy. Then we got Travis to design some merch by himself, which obviously was a range. And then we said, okay, if we've chanced upon this thing called Famous Orders, which came from this very simple fan truth, fan insight, and we've decided to talk fan to fan. We said, can we take Famous Orders on a world tour? So, with thoughtfully created customer, touch points at every turn. So we worked with K-pop, BTS to create a BTS meal, right? 2 new sauces and limited time special packaging. Again, this case will also give you a flavor of the fact that this is not just advertising, right? There's social embedded in it, there's product innovation embedded in it. We are certainly now talking to the product guys saying, okay, we are doing a BTS meal, can we launch some sauces? We are now talking to the packaging guys saying, okay, can we do limited edition packaging? Scarcity value builds brands. So we said, okay, let's do this, and we did the BTS meal. Of course, we launched some comms around it to kind of introduce the sauces and the other line extensions that we did. Just to give you a sense of the kind of packaging work that went into designing these limited edition products that were made available, all coming from a simple brand voice decision that was made, which said, let's talk fan to fan, right? Anchored on a simple insight, everyone has their favorite McDonald's order. Again, just to give you a flavor of the kind of packaging that went into it. And the social media erupted, because when BTS does this kind of thing, and hopefully some K-pop fans are there in this room, what you see on the screen right now is it's all user-generated content. It's UGC. None of this was done by the brand, right? So they fell in love with the kind of packaging that we did. They started designing their shoes, started designing all sorts of things, as you can see, phone covers, etc. This is user-generated content at its best. And of course, we did some commercials also to promote the BTS meal. Okay, anyways, we'll skip that. So what happened in Indonesia, we were actually forced to shut down because there was so crazy number of people turning up at the stores that we had a supply chain issue. That's what happens when you have great advertising, it breaks the supply chain. So we had to kind of shut it down, also because these were COVID times and social distancing and appropriate COVID behavior and all of that was also being enforced in restaurants. It worked so well. How do you know that your advertising is working really well? Well, when competitors copy it. So Burger King copied it. They did their own celebrity meals. Didn't work much. KFC copied it. This was in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, where they did the Jack Harlow meal. Yeah, so that's McDonald's. That's giving voice to a simple insight Everyone has a famous McDonald's order, and it is guiding the brand team and the creative team saying, can we talk to people from a fan to fan perspective instead of trying to talk to people as a brand to a consumer. Indigo is a very well-known example, so I'm going to breeze through this, but just to give you a sense of how we gave birth to Indigo Airlines and the kind of work that went into it. I'm not going to play any advertising because I think what works for Indigo is the in-flight experience more than the advertising, right? And the stuff that we did around the flight experience and the way we created the brand. If we go back to the year 2003, this was a very cluttered environment. Some of you may remember it. The floodgates to low-cost airlines had opened up. There were all sorts of players: Air Deccan, SpiceJet, Sahara, Kingfisher, Go Air. And 2006 is when Indigo decided to launch. And they were very clear they wanted to be the market leader, like all new brands that come to the category. And we said, okay, how do we find a unique voice and positioning for this brand? So the challenge was in an environment limited by cost constraints, i.e. LCC carriers, low-cost carriers. The challenge was to make low-cost flying feel more than a commodity. Remember, we spoke about earlier about how does this brand make you feel. So Indigo may be a low-cost airlines, Indigo may be a budget airlines, but when you fly Indigo, you don't feel that you're flying with the budget airlines. Right? That was really the intent. So we wanted Indigo to become the airline people love to fly. And of course the target audience was the common man, because again, that was the time where, you know, even from an aviation sector point of view, it was opening up. And for Indigo, we said it wasn't about just going from point A to point B. It was about the entire flying experience across every touch point. So we actually did a customer journey audit to kind of get our heads around the fact that if somebody wants to book a ticket, till the time they board the aircraft and eventually alight the aircraft, what are the moments that are available to us from a touch point perspective, and how can we disrupt or subvert those moments? It's very difficult to do because the aviation ministry also has some, very well-defined, hardcore laws which you can't flout. You have to respect the kind of laws in place. And the insight was really very simple. Affordable air travel was not about a cheap price for the common man. It was about a stylish international experience for a global new Indian. And the brand voice, since we are talking about voice, and hopefully everybody will agree, Indigo's brand voice is fun, it's fresh, it's smart, it's always simple, but it's slightly cheeky. It finds small yet significant ways to break through and give you a wink and a smile, so you never feel hassled, bored, or dare we say, common. When you're flying Indigo, hopefully you never feel these kind of things, and yet you kind of sense the quirk in everything that we've done for the airline so far. So the resulting campaign was India's Coolest Airlines. It may have become very common practice these days, but let me remind you, Indigo was the first aircraft to actually launch the ramp instead of the staircase. So that's the first thing that we broke. We said if we want to be fun, fresh, quirky, why should we have staircases which people have to climb? Why can't it be ramps? Down to the detailing of how we will talk, activating the voice, since we're talking about brand voice, even on our luggage tags. Right? Even, for example, if you're carrying fragile items, we oftentimes request crew members to put kind of fragile stickers, how they will look, what will be the vocabulary when we go down to that kind of thing. It's not just commercials. The tapes that kind of form the aisles inside the airport, where we said no red tape. So again, just being a little tongue-in-cheek, being a little quirky. In-flight experience, again, all of us are very familiar with this, the kind of crew uniforms, the badges that they were wearing, even the bags that we designed for first-time flyers, where sometimes people get nauseated and they want to kind of throw up inside the aircraft. A very simple but human messaging around get well soon. We obviously were being very tongue-in-cheek when we decided to call the magazine Hello 6E, which of course is a tongue-in-cheek play at the word sexy, without saying sexy, right? So it's Hello 6E. Again, I'm sure all of you remember the kind of magazine covers through the years that we've kind of designed. It's a quirky, illustrative style, which was very fresh at that time. Packaging design, some of you may remember this, right? Whether it's the Chandni Chowk to the sky, whether it's the kind of sandwich stuff that we did. The nut case continues to be a favorite, I'm told. So little kind of anecdotes on tin packaging, which again kind of is a visual reinforcement of the voice. Again, packaging labels and the way we wanted to play with the vocabulary. Even with something as banal as mundane as chips, trying to be a little smart and tongue-in-cheek. Some of you may remember this Matchbox, packaging that used to exist at one point of time for Chicken 65. Just to give you a flavor, the submarine packaging. And in advertising, of course, we had to carry forward the same tone of voice. Let me also confess, a lot of these lines were written by really, really young people. Right? So we leaned on our young blood, our young folks to kind of continue with this voice. Just some samples. Every supermodel's favorite airline, 2 extra inches of legroom on all our flights. That's a really boring brief if you talk to any of the creative directors in the room. Right? Sell this airline on the fact that it's got extra legroom. But the way you communicate that can be very interesting, can be memorable. This is one of my favorites. Sleep with your wife. Some same day return flights from all metros. Right? Again, tongue-in-cheek, people remember, people get it, people smile along with you. Your palace or mine. Introducing daily flights to Jodhpur. Right? Again, taking a common parlance, flipping it on its head. Chicken soup for the soul, daily flights to Lucknow, starting at whatever. When we were even announcing kind of new destinations. For example, in this case, Surat, Kya Surat hai, was the headline. Again, look at the brand voice, right? So we looked at McDonald's, which came from a very different kind of space where the challenge was very different. We had to get the swagger back. It had, decades of history. It was an American icon, continues to be. In the case of Indigo, we were faced with breaking through into a category which had a lot of low-cost airlines operating. We could have been another airline and we could have opted to show just crew and meals and this and that. We decided to adopt a fresh voice. The third one that I wanted to kind of share with all of you is Lurpak, which is, like I said, is in the business. It started with making butter. Of course, over a period of time, it has gone into other kind of food items as well. But just to give you a sense of Lurpak, the context, the brand positioning for Lurpak really is very simple. For people who love good food, Lurpak makes it even better. That's the real simple positioning for Lurpak. For those who love good food, we make it even better. What do we mean by good food? We value what goes on our plate. Simple, fresh, seasonal and cooked from scratch. So quality over quantity. Healthy in the real sense of the word. Everything in moderation. And good old common sense. Right? So Lurpak, the main enemy or the villain in Lurpak's life is ready-to-eat meals, ready-to-cook foods. Right? So and a lot of British folks, men, women who run very busy lives, much like us, oftentimes lean on ready-to-eat, ready-to-cook stuff, which can be just whipped up to cook a meal. Lurpak actually takes an opposing view when it comes to food. It believes you should cook food with your own hands, and that's what makes it great. And what do we mean by cooking good food? Cooking refers to all food created from scratch, including spreading, cooking and baking. And the essence of the brand was a champion of good food. Right? That's what we wanted to create. And we have our own voice, like in the case of McDonald's and Indigo. We said for Lurpak, it's going to be epic, it's going to be playful, it's going to be witty. It's the voice of the food god. Right? Now, I'd like to underline the word the food god. Right? Now again, when you give that kind of an angularity or sharpness to your brief, again, it's very, it kind of already sets up the creative person to kind of take a leap from that kind of a conversation. Because now suddenly you're not talking about a brand that makes butter, right? Or a brand that makes butter that can easily spread, right? Or a brand that makes butter that has X percentage less trans fat. All of that is rational stuff. Yes, we will talk about that. But how do we talk? What's our voice? The voice is that of a food god. Therefore, the food god. We know food. What does the word food god mean? We know food. We have a certain authority when it comes to it. We'll be witty. Our opinion is put across playfully. We have character. We are not straight. But we'll be accessible. We'll live in the real world and we'll use language everyone can understand and relate to. Our approach is not complicated, highbrow or snobby. It's okay to call a souffle a puffy thing. And I hope this plays. Otherwise, we're going to switch to our most hotspot and try again.
Tonight, as we stand on the edge of possibility, we choose the path less trodden. We choose to embrace the unknown with wide-eyed wonder. Tonight we choose adventure. Who can say what the journey might throw at us? But we've conquered puffy things, bony things, bottom of the sea things. With your back by our side, we will scoop, splash, squeeze our way to new frontiers. That is our destiny, and tonight, that will be our dinner. Cooks, venture forth with new Lurkback Cooks range.
So around the idea of adventure, it's positioning cooking as an adventure by itself, and you obviously see the semiotics of the ad, the way the food items are shot, the way it kind of gives you a sense that you're going into space. There's an exploration, there's a sense of adventure.
Tonight,
This is another one that we did for Lurkback, just to kind of demonstrate to you how that voice of food god can actually straddle multiple food occasions, can talk to different consumer cohorts.
ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to try something a little different. We're going freestyle. Hit it. Let's find the groove. Something that feels right. Now grab some bread. Yeah. Take a pinch of who knows what. A dash of what the hell. And then we're back. Spread it, baby. Now have some peace. Too much. That's it right there. Those guys are cooking. That's food. Go freestyle with Lurkback Spread.
So variant advertising, main brand launching a variant which is going into spreadables. Then celebrating the idea of cooks. Remember we said we are for people who enjoy food, for people who like to cook.
The world could do some good. Relax when you can scramble them. Put a hot pan and a little Lurkback. A cook can heal the sick, feed the masses, and raise the dead. So choose your way, embrace the unwanted, and transform nothing into everything. The world needs more cooks, because when there are cooks, there is hope. Yum.
One more on different consumption occasion.
In this place of pots and pans and slightly blunt knives, lives the cook. Not for an early ready meal. The cook weeps red.
share some static work that we've done just to demonstrate to you how that voice was carried forward. Just some close shots of food, but very interesting copy, very interesting headline. I'll just let it on the screen for you to read. Like I was saying, that their main problem is ready to cook food is the villain. So for example, Triumph never came out of a microwave. Empires were never built on muesli bars. If you think of having muesli bars and replacing your breakfast, please don't do that. Please cook your breakfast, because that's what this brand believes in. Heroics are not just for Sunday lunch alone. Belief, instinct is the key ingredient. Messy makes the mouth water. Perfection doesn't have to be perfect. Right? So being a brand that's real, but talking like the food god. And hence you saw the kind of advertising that you just saw. Because if you're the food god, the way you shoot food, the way you kind of bring to life that experience, that promise, cannot be like any other brand that has done before. So yeah, hopefully that has kind of given you three kind of distinct flavors to the concept of brand voice. First up we saw McDonald's, then we looked at Indigo, and then we kind of looked at Lubbock. So this is really my last slide which I want to leave you with. When we are in choppy waters, like we always are as marketeers or brands, I'd encourage you to think about what does your brand believe in. Spend a lot of time on finding out the truth. Great brands, there are a lot of senior members sitting in this room, they will also hopefully echo this and tell you that great brands are built on, irrefutable, timeless truths. So find that truth. Get into a room, get in with your clients, get in with your colleagues. Try and define a very sharp mood for your brand. If you're able to kind of bring it down to one or two words, that's always very helpful. What is the world that you want to build? Right? We spoke about, for example, Old Spice repositioning itself from being an old fuddy-duddy brand to being a brand that's experienced, and hence the entire kind of repositioning that they had done. What does this brand want to make you feel, so that we speak to the heart and not just to the head? How does it want to behave? Great example is Indigo, not behaving like a low-cost airline. And finally, what is your tone of voice, which again obviously kind of brings to closure the conversation around brand voice. So that's all that I had for you today. I'm happy to kind of take any questions, points of view, observations. The house is really open to you now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Anirban. Any questions, please? See, a lot of you guys wanted planners to be a part of Ad Talk, so please do ask questions. So that it can be a learning exercise for all of us. Yeah, please.
Hi, sir. So I have some questions. First question is, what if your brand doesn't have a strong voice? They are very, reluctant to set a voice, or their voice is very feeble.
So if your brand doesn't have a voice, I think the best place to start is to define the values of the brand. Right? I mean, and there's a old Steve Jobs video floating on YouTube. Please see it, where he talks about, and back then where he talks about how we are living in a very, very noisy world, and the only thing that can distinguish us from any other brand is our values. So I think if your brand doesn't have a voice, in all likelihood your brand doesn't have values. And if it has values, then it's just existing in PowerPoints and it's not getting into the creative director's room. Right? So define the values, define the point of view, find the truth about the brand. The truth can come from anywhere. It can come from the founder, it can come from the history of the brand, it can come from the consumer, it can come from research, it can come from how you want to reframe competition. The truth can come from anywhere. But find that truth. Once you found the truth, you'll find your voice.
So at that time, from my understanding, almost all of the airlines had a very bland and almost very similar brand experience. Like we give luxury, we give world-class experience and all that. How was it, to bring in a different point of view in Indigo, like the illustrated stuff, the cheeky voice? How did you figure out that it would work?
Great question. Like all good advertising, you never know whether it will work or not. till the time it's there out in the market. That's the honest truth. What we were cognizant of, however, was, if you remember, there were brands like Air Deccan that was doing very overtly emotional ads, right? So kids watching an aeroplane flying by and what it feels if you were on that aeroplane and that kind of advertising. There was also Kingfisher that was on the other end of the spectrum, which was exactly what you were saying, which is red carpet. We have a kick-ass kind of crew. The experience is almost luxury, right? We'll treat you with a lot of royalty. That were the codes of that brand. But there wasn't any brand that was talking to people in a fun manner, in that category per se, which was a sitting duck. And we said, if something is cheap, doesn't mean it can't be fun, right? I mean, we use obviously politically correct words like value for money and low cost, but fundamentally, it was a cheap airline, right? It gave you budget fares. That's why people wanted to fly it. But we said, why should low cost airline feel cheap? That was really the starting point. Just because you're cheap doesn't mean your advertising has to feel cheap. Doesn't mean that you talk like, the person who's flying with you feels, oh, I'm of a certain class and I cannot afford the other expensive airlines. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the fact that I flew Indigo today morning. I'm sure a lot of you guys have flown Indigo in your lives. And I don't think when we fly Indigo, we feel, ye to budget airlines hai, or oh, that is business class and this is economy class. It doesn't occur to your mind because over the years it has framed and spoken to you in certain manner and not through advertising. That's the best part about Indigo. Indigo actually has done very little TV advertising. It has only done 2 or 3 campaigns in its entire life for very short periods of time. What it built its vocabulary and experience on was actually the in-flight experience, was actually what you looked at when you were sitting on the seat, on the headrest in front of you, what you looked at when you picked up the magazine, how you interacted with even something as banal as a cucumber cheese tomato sandwich. But it packaged it, it gamified it, it made it interactive. You were flying a low-cost airline, chances are you were feeling bored because you didn't have TVs and all like you would in an international flight. But it gave you kind of tools and ammunition to make your life and flight a little more interesting. And I think that kind of honest attempt, cuts through the masses a lot more than just pretentious behavior. I hope that answers.
Feedback from the flyer?
Sorry?
Did you have feedback from the flyers?
Yes, we constantly, even today, right? So there is a constant machinery that kind of keeps seeking feedback from the flyers. But I'll be honest, in all the 3 cases, whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Indigo, or whether it's Le Parc, in the traditional sense of the term, we did not do research to get feedback on the concept. On McDonald's we did, because we went and spent a lot of time with people. In Indigo, we spent a lot of time to understand where the gap was. And the gap was the fact that there was no airline that was talking in the manner that Indigo did, to make them feel not so low cost passenger in that sense of the term. But yes, feedback loops are very important, and that's something that we always kind of encourage. We don't get kind of discouraged by what we pick up. We tend to focus on the good things that come our way. But yes, we do speak to the flyers a lot.
How do you know that this brand voice is right for this brand?
Very good question. I mean, I think there are some markers that help in the traditional sense of the term, especially when you're creating a brand or when you're repositioning a brand, in the case, for example, of McDonald's. I think the first marker is penetration. That if you've done a repositioning or if you've created a brand and you've given it a very sharp voice, if more and more consumers are coming to your fold, largely the usual definition of penetration, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is, am I increasing the user base for my brand? That's usually a good kind of metric to kind of track, saying that this is working. That's not the only metric, and advertising is not the only reason why that might happen. There are several other reasons: pricing, distribution, availability, etc., etc. So that would be one metric. The second metric of tracking whether that voice is working or not in our time and age, in the world that we live in, is the kind of earned media and organic sharing that is happening. Like I always tell my mother, who has nothing to do with advertising, she's 75 years old and she still can't understand what I do in advertising because I'm not a creative guy. But if something lands in her WhatsApp inbox and if she forwards that ad to me, I know that ad is floating in culture. Right? It is not being shared just by people who practice or are practitioners of the industry. If the common man on the street is talking about some communication, which in today's world can spread very rapidly through social media, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, that also is a very good indicator that what you're doing is being successful. How to gauge that you're not being very successful on the other side? I think the straight up answer is, it will not make a dent on your either penetration numbers or sales numbers or even brand lift numbers. If you look at the classic brand track kind of matrices, it will reflect very poorly if the campaign is not good.
Again, in Indigo's example, you are trying to communicate, or the USP was a low-cost airline thing, but the brand voice was elsewhere. So, as the exploring USP for finding out the tone of your brand become outdated in your opinion, or is it still relevant? Because Indigo, it's not in line.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Again, that's a very good question. I think for Indigo, it has gone to a point where that vocabulary has now become the distinctive brand asset. Like if I take out that vocabulary and tone of voice from Indigo, and if I gave that brand a different personality and a different vocabulary, it wouldn't feel like Indigo. Right? And a lot of these cases have happened in the past. For example, famously I remember Tropicana being kind of repositioned from what it was to beach mein, Pepsi tried to kind of change things around. It crashed, market share fell. Right? So if we were to change the tone of voice and everything that we've built so far, my intuitive sense is it will come crashing down. Right? Because people have an intuitive sense of brands, and that is why we like and opt for those brands. If those brands change overnight in some form or manner, particularly for a brand that has been established in a very fun, tongue-in-cheek, human manner, if it starts talking like Vistara from tomorrow, it'll pass like a ship in the night, would be my sense.
I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about back then. When you explored this brand model, at that time, obviously one of the options would have been to highlight the price tag.
Right.
So that's a dissonance, right? That's not in line with the brand voice that you ultimately chose.
Okay. Sorry, I got your question. Yeah. So even back then and even today, we continue to do price-based advertising, right? Price promotions, right? So for example, Indigo does sale promotions, right? If you buy a ticket between this and this period, you will get at such a low cost. Or if it's launching at a new destination, there are price-led comms. But even when we are doing price-led comms, we don't lose the vocabulary that we have. See, even as a human being, we have different voices, right? I mean, we go to workplace, we speak in a certain voice that perhaps reflects the designation that we hold, the office that we hold, and the responsibility that we hold. When we are at home with our family, the way you perhaps talk to your partner or your children or your friends is very different. You have different voices. And brands will also have different voices. No one single brand cannot have just a very unidimensional voice, but it will boil down to how you talk. So even a hardcore price proposition, sale communication, like for example, I showed you the example of your palace or mine. Right now, what is the brief? The brief is low cost, flight routes from Delhi to Jodhpur. That's the brief. Right? You can now fly to Delhi to Jodhpur at $2,000. That's the brief. Even the chicken soup for that matter, or even the kya surat hai for that matter. You've taken that is there embedded in the comms that you're putting, in that case a static piece of advertising. But the way you're saying it is slightly memorable, it's slightly cheeky, it's slightly fun.
So you still explore the USP part of it, generally we work with that.
Yes, always.
Sir, what were the challenges when brand voice for Indigo when it went vernacular across the country?
Lots of challenges.
Anyone?
Lots of challenges. It wasn't very easy, right? But I think the way we overcome those challenges was that we decided to go very hyper-local. So for example, I'm a Bengali, so I can tell you from my Bengali vocabulary. When Indigo does communication around the West Bengal market or some Bengali cultural event like say Durga Puja, it will talk about it again in a very fun cultural manner which only Bengalis will get. Like for example, if it talks in Tamilian, it will take some part of Tamil culture which only a Tamilian will get, and a non-native will not understand those nuances. So it does that, but it's not easily translatable. The way it smoothly comes across as in English, it doesn't happen so easily in languages. It's difficult. Sorry, go ahead.
My question is, you talk.
The brand wise that we're talking about, it keeps changing over a period of time. And like say for example, we've grown up with that culture and voice, and we so resonate. But I look at the next generation now. They have not grown with that journey. So for us, there is a moment of nostalgia associated with it because we kind of seen how it's happening. But to them, it is not that nostalgia. For them, it has to be a sense of fresh communication, more relatable to them. So I would say, how do you see these challenges? One, do you lose me because I'm with the brand, so it's enough, this guy is going to come back? And how do I change the voice to attract the new gen, which is altogether looking from a different perspective?
Yeah, that's again a fantastic question, and I'll respond to that question with the example of Nike, right? Because hopefully everyone has a shared meaning for Nike. We've grown up with a lot of Nike ads, right? A lot of inspirational stuff, old days, iconic, right the future, Roberto Baggio, etc., etc. Iconic Nike ads. But if you look at Nike's playbook today, it continues to speak through the voice of an athlete. It has not left that space vacant. What it does, however, is it adds certain dimensions to that voice. So if earlier it was only about being courageous or only about being inspiring, today you will see a Nike commercial, like hopefully you must have seen with that Colin Kaepernick commercial that happened a couple of years back, where people started burning Nike shoes and Nike market share fell initially. It was an ad in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. It was a very serious subject in America. It was a very sensitive subject because we're suddenly talking race. And it's obviously talking to youngsters as well who were part of that movement, a large part of that movement. So the straight up answer to that is, it's very seductive to try and vacate that space and say, let's try and be something which we are not, because here is a new franchisee who's 14-year-old or 18-year-old or 21-year-old who's got the money and is more valuable to me as a marketer for me to kind of attract. And let's forget about the grey-haired people in the room who's got me till here. But I think it's a question of balancing and adding in certain dimensions and chops. For example, if Indigo were to advertise on Snapchat, Indigo cannot advertise the same way it's advertising in newspapers. That vocabulary has to be Snapchat friendly, right? It has to be much more staccato, it has to be much more visual, it has to be much more filter led, right? And same case, I mean, if you look at Nike, Nothing Beats a Londoner, or if you look at Nike Spike Lee, the one that they made, I think about a year back, the vocabulary is very different. In fact, in the Spike Lee commercial, there's the real Spike Lee, the director, who's now obviously in his probably 70s or early 80s. And there was a young girl sitting on the other side of the table, and both of them are just having a conversation about Nike, right? So it's a question of adding dimensions. Having said all of this, I will also kind of further fuel controversy by saying this. Sometimes certain subjects, certain topics are timeless. In the world of Nike, failure is failure. In the world of Nike, success is success. In the world of Nike, racial discrimination is racial discrimination. It feels the same way, it hurts the same way, the joy is the same. When Serena retired, they made a commercial that said, by doing nothing, you changed everything, right? That commercial was, aimed at youngsters as well, right? Who may not have grown watching Serena Williams, but it was one of the most shared commercials that Nike made during that time. So there's no silver bullet to that answer, but two parts to it. One is, don't vacate the position that you have, because that's what's built it. So if you vacate it, somebody else is going to take it, and you'll end up with a leaky bucket for sure. Secondly, of course, don't change yourself just to attract a new franchisee. But if you add certain dimensions, I think you'll find the right balance to be relevant, modern, and yet hold on to what makes you you. So there's one question at the back.
So I have a question. When you say you create a brand voice, and it is necessary to understand the competitors, what they do, or it is only about your family, your team. I mean, what I'm saying is,
yeah. No, absolutely great question. Again, it is 100% essential to understand how the other competitors are talking, right? Because if you don't understand how others are talking, you will not understand where you can pitch your voice, right? So the shortest answer to that is absolutely we have to do the rigor of understanding competitive brands, how they talk, right? If they in certain categories, there could be brands that have large legacy players who are big players who own large market share, have a distinct brand voice. Then the challenge is even more tough. You already have a giant sitting in the room with large amount of market share. How do you use voice to kind of make it your own and make a dent in the market? So 100% yes. Sorry, there was a question at the back.
I actually wanted to add on to the previous question's point. In my opinion, as a consumer, I feel that Old Spice is a really good example that has been talked about. Where even though, even for so long, I don't feel they truly changed their voice for the newer generation. Instead, they've made nostalgia a part of their brand, wherein they, say how your dad has used it, your grandpa has used it, and you should continue using it because it's like a gold standard kind of thing.
Yeah, Old Spice is a good example. Yeah. Old Spice went through a pivotal moment because again shares were falling and it was becoming irrelevant. Back to the question that the gentleman was asking earlier, right? And Old Spice was seen as the dad's brand. But like I said, the framing was from old to experienced. See, Axe never framed their deodorants as we are deodorants meant for people who are experienced, right? So the entire Old Spice spiel is that in the sea of masculinity, when young men are growing up, they need to navigate the seas of masculinity, and they need a brand that can help them be seen as experienced. That's really the Old Spice strategy, and therefore every piece of work that you see from, does your man smell like a man, to the kind of work that they did with the wolf, and to the work that they continue to do today. I mean, who wants to tweet at a deodorant brand? Think about it, right? I mean, we have better things to do. We don't want to tweet at a deodorant brand, but we did when they launched the kind of stuff that they did. So yes, to your point, the way that reframing happened was we didn't let go of our distinctive assets. It was still those ceramic bottles, it was still those distinctive shape, it was still that red cap that went on top of the bottle. We never kind of tossed around with any of those hardcore, so as to say, brand attic, but we did kind of level it up and added the dimension of experience on top of everything that we had done in the past.
Sir, would you agree if Indigo tomorrow takes a celebrity brand ambassador? Would you agree?
I would feel very sad if it did so, because it's a brand that has a very distinct voice of its own. In my opinion, celebrity advertising is a very lazy form of advertising. When we don't have ideas in the room to say let's into celebrities. Celebrities help with breaking clutter. It gives you eyeballs, especially in the case of new brands, a lot of D2C brands. We know India has almost 100 unicorns now. It has more than 100,000 registered startups if we are to go by government data. It helps when brands are kind of launching in terms of eyeballs. But with Indigo, I would be very sad, because Indigo, in my mind, the brand is the celebrity, right? The brand talks in a certain way, the brand behaves in a certain way. If it got a celebrity, it would be very disappointing. But that's my personal view.
I just want to understand what is your take on something like a brand, government-owned brand, Amul. What is its brand voice? And then it's been there for the last 30-40 years, or even more, right? So what is your take in terms of its brand voice and communication?
I think Amul has, first of all, I think I pay a lot of respect to that brand. Right? I'm very fond of the kind of work it does. And I think it has happened because it has found a very distinctive take on topical cultural issues that affect the nation. Right? Whether it's sports, whether it's politics, whether it's somebody winning something for the first time, whether it's local level things. Sometimes Amul will even issue local ads at a vernacular kind of level where they are reacting to something that's happening in very hyper local markets. Right? So I think the tone of voice that Amul has adopted is to kind of reflect it's almost like an ode to the times. Right? If there was a brand that was constantly paying a tribute to the things that was happening around us in culture, if there was an Indian brand, I think Amul does a great job of doing that, and it has been doing this since time when there was no social media. Right? From that day and age, it's been doing it. I think it's got a very distinctive brand voice, coupled with the distinctive asset of the Amul girl. I think both the girl and the voice, I mean, even if you remove the logo, everybody will say this is an Amul ad, right? So that's my personal take on Amul.
This is different from what you say, but what you are doing currently. What made you want to be a planner?
It's a great question, man. Advertising happened by accident, so I was not preparing for it. But it was this gentleman called Sai Raghavan, who was, I think, early 2000s. He was the head of strategy in Saatchi in Delhi. And I started off in copywriting, then I moved into account management and eventually settled for planning. And he was the one who pushed me, saying, why don't you try, there's something called strategy, there's something called planning, why don't you give it a shot? And he was kind enough to kind of include me under his wings. And ever since then I haven't looked back. I think it's something that he saw in me more than what I saw in planning. At that point, honestly, I didn't have any idea about what strategy is, what planning is. I still don't, but that's the answer.
Do all brands necessarily need to have a voice? Can there be a silent brand?
I think all brands need to have a voice. They can be a silent brand also, but sometimes silence is also a voice. If you're in a very crowded room and you're the only quiet person in the room, that itself is taking a stance, right? So the starting point is not that we need to have a voice and let's sit down and let's make up a committee to find the voice of the brand. The starting point is, what does this brand believe in? What is the truth of this brand? What truth does this brand want to build itself on? Right? So if that is the starting point, then the question is, how do I say it? I can say it, like I said, competitively, irreverently, optimistically. I can say it sarcastically. I can say it in a manner that people laugh. I can say it in a manner that people want to cry. When you think about Cadbury's, for example, for the longest time it has done, if you look back at the olden days of Cadbury, like Shubharam and all of those commercials, if you remember, what was the brand tone of Cadbury at that point of time? It was actually the middle class voice. Right? If you remember all those ads, like this iconic "I love you" ad, where there's a couple across the dining table and the woman is saying, "Aap mujhe abhi aur I love you nahi bolte hain." And he's saying, and he walks up to the ref and he gives the Cadbury, and she says, "But ab to ye mujhe har din." And that's when the Cadbury tune comes in, and that's it. There's only like two dialogues, right? But it tells you that it's the voice of middle class aspiration, middle class happiness, small things that bring joy to people, and hence the kind of campaigns that brand build. But short answer to it, 100% I believe you need to have a voice, especially in today's time because it's very cluttered.
Question: how the relations between you and the creative directors, the strategies and the creative director needs? What was the experience? Do you have any strategy? What planner? Creative people will start work on the. What are the experience? There'll be a creative guy always has his own set of mindset and sitting on top. And what was the level of conversation and the acceptance between you and the creative?
Great question. So first up, the creative guys are always going to be the gods and the demigods of this industry. They are the bosses, because rightfully so, because they make the work that goes out in the market. Like I said, nobody's ever going to see this PowerPoint out in the market, but everybody will hopefully see the work that gets made of the brands that we discuss. I think, at least personally, I can tell you what has worked for me as a planner in terms of my collaboration with my creative partners and creative directors and whoever else. I have always walked into the room asking a very simple question: how can I be useful? Right? I think if you walk into the room asking how can I be useful, more often than not, people drop their guards. The egos vanish. I think friction happens when there is ego and when there is, I told you this, but you're not listening. Oh, but I have some other idea. I will not listen to you. I don't need planning. I will tell you what my idea is. I think all of that exists when we try to push our ways. Instead, if we walk into the room saying, how can I be useful to you? then more often than not, I think creative people are much more open, much more collaborative. And I think the other thing that has worked really well for me is always going to them and trying to stimulate them intellectually. Saying, here's your problem, but here is one way of looking at the problem, here's another way of looking at the problem, here's another way of looking at the problem. And that creative person may piss on all the ways that I am sharing with that person, right? It can happen. But it's about going back and waking up next day and again coming back and saying, but here's another way of looking at that problem. And I think some way they will then appreciate that perseverance that we display and demonstrate. And somewhere we are talking to human beings, right? All these labels of creative strategy all are industry driven. We are all human beings at the end of the day. So if we talk to each other as human beings and say, how can I be useful? I think helps break a lot of barriers.
What does it take to be a good planner? What should we do? I'm just starting out, so what should I?
What does it take to be a good planner?
What should I?
It's a very difficult question.
You're already one.
I don't know. I mean, over the years,
Being very modest.
over the years, what I have learned, I can tell you from my learnings. I think as a planner, you need to be extremely curious at all levels, not at the level of advertising. Right? It's not just about ads. You need to understand how the brain works, how people behave, what touches people. You need to understand sociology. You need to understand how we evolved as a civilization. You need to understand culture at one level, right? And while these may seem like different functions by itself, I think having that sense of curiosity sends planners to places where other people naturally don't go. And I think when we go to places that other people naturally don't go, we find things that other people don't find, which in turn then becomes very useful to the creative process, because we are just the pipe through which the wind sings, right? I mean, we are not the one who kind of plays that tune, it's the creative person who sings that tune. But I think curiosity and I think a sense of relentlessness. I think oftentimes we give up too easily in our industry, in our craft. Oh, yeah, client has rejected this. Think of another idea. Some of the great ads that I've shown you today, in some cases, has taken 11 years, 12 years to be produced. It has taken 12 years for a person to push through with an idea. So I think a degree of relentlessness is extremely important to be a planner. You have to be absolutely okay to fail every day. You have to be okay with people, throwing you out of their rooms, and you have to come back again and say, how can I be useful?
Chokka customer.
Have you ever retrofit presentation?
Oh yes, we do all the time. I'll be lying if I say we don't. Sometimes the creative guys, or even account management for that matter, or even the receptionist for that matter, anybody can come up with a great idea. When that great idea is born, when that happens, I think it's our job to sell it, right? So I don't see any shame in retrofitting strategy slides to sell the idea. I think as David Ogilvy famously said, our job is to sell, right? I think we often forget that. We think we are artists. We are not artists. We are commercial artists. Clients hire us not to burn advertising monies. They hire us so that their products or service sell. So if somebody has a great idea, I mean, so be it. It's my job to write a great presentation to ensure that that idea sells. So yeah, we do it all the time.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you so much for your questions. Before we disperse, we have some rituals to do. I call upon Chokka to just step forward and present the memento to Anand. This memento is from the Hindu. I'd like to thank Navneet. Navneet is not here today with us. That's the front page of the Hindu when Anirban was born. I'd like to thank Hindu for this special memento.